calling all true crime enthusiasts. Before we plunge into the chilling depths of a case that shook the very foundations of American justice, I have a quick request. If you're as captivated by the dark intricacies of human nature and the relentless pursuit of truth as I am, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join our community as we unravel the most perplexing and terrifying criminal cases. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and ensure the victims are never forgotten. Now buckle up. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. The late autumn air in Edenwood, Oregon, clung with the crisp promise of winter, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was a town cradled in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, a place where neighbor knew neighbor, and the biggest scandal usually involved a misplaced garden gnome or a contentious bake sale. But on the morning of October 27, 2003, the tranquility of Edenwood was shattered, not by a gentle breeze, but by a scream that seemed to tear the fabric of the idyllic town itself. Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose face was a roadmap of past cases and sleepless nights, was sipping lukewarm coffee in his cluttered office at the Edenwood Police Department when the call came in. "Corbin, you'll want to hear this." His dispatcher, Carol, a woman whose voice was usually as calm as a steady stream, stammered, It's the Blackwood residence. Multiple fatalities. Looks like a bloodbath." Miles felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. The Blackwoods, a prominent family, the kind whose philanthropy was as well known as their immaculate, sprawling estate on the outskirts of town. Samuel Blackwood, a titan of industry, his wife Eleanor, a beacon of local charity, and their two teenage children, Olivia and Michael, a picture of American success, or so it seemed. He grabbed his jacket, the worn leather smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and duty, and rushed out, the siren of his patrol car a mournful wail cutting through the morning silence. As he drove, the serene beauty of Edenwood seemed to mock the impending horror. The vibrant fall foliage, the perfectly manicured lawns, the cheerful pumpkin decorations all felt like a thin veneer over something unspeakably dark. The Blackwood estate, Whispering Pines, lived up to its name. Towering ponderosa pines lined the long, winding driveway, their needles forming a soft, aromatic carpet. But as Miles's car broke through the tree line, the scene that unfolded was anything but peaceful. Red and blue lights pulsed erratically, painting the grand, stone-faced mansion in a macabre dance. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, moved with a hesitant efficiency, as if afraid to disturb the sanctity of the horror within. Sheriff Thompson, a burly man whose usually jovial demeanor had been replaced by a look of profound shock, met Miles at the perimeter. "Miles, thank God you're here. This is beyond anything I've ever seen. It's a slaughter." "Who found them?" Miles asked, his voice steady despite the rising dread. "The maid, Maria Rodriguez, came in for her morning shift, found the front door ajar. Thought it was odd, but then she saw it. In the living room. She's in shock, getting checked out by the paramedics." Thompson gestured towards a white ambulance where Maria, a small woman with wide, terrified eyes, was being attended to. Miles nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no obvious struggle outside. This wasn't a random break-in gone wrong. This felt intimate, personal. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs with a metallic tang that he knew, instinctively, was the scent of blood. He donned his latex gloves, the thin material a flimsy barrier against the coming violation, and stepped through the threshold of the Blackwood home. The grand foyer, usually a welcoming space adorned with antique furniture and elegant artwork, was silent, save for the hushed whispers of forensic technicians. The air was thick, heavy with the coppery smell. Miles's eyes immediately fell upon the living room, visible through an open archway. And then he saw it. The scene was a tableau of unimaginable brutality. Samuel Blackwood lay sprawled on the plush Persian rug, his usually impeccably dressed form now a grotesque heap, his chest a crimson ruin. Eleanor, still in her silk nightgown, was slumped against a grand piano, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ornate ceiling, a dark, viscous pool fanning out beneath her. The sheer violence was breathtaking, a visceral punch to the gut. This wasn't just murder. It was an execution, a display of raw, unbridled rage. He moved deeper into the house, his gaze taking in every detail, every chilling implication. The forensic team was already at work, meticulously documenting the horror. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the lead forensic pathologist, a woman of sharp intellect and an unsettling ability to remain dispassionate in the face of death, met his eye. Her face, usually serene, was drawn. "Miles," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is a bloodbath. Multiple stab wounds on Samuel and Eleanor. Olivia and Michael. They're upstairs." Her voice trailed off, a rare tremor in her usually stoic delivery. Upstairs. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Miles ascended the grand staircase, each creaking step echoing the weight of the tragedy. The upstairs hallway was eerily quiet, the only sound the muffled clicking of cameras and the quiet directives of the crime scene investigators. Olivia Blackwood, a vibrant 17-year-old with dreams of attending an Ivy League school, was found in her bedroom. She lay on her bed, her hands bound, a gag in her mouth. Her eyes, still open, reflected a terror so profound it seemed to etch itself into the very air. The cause of death was suffocation, but the signs of a struggle were evident. The bedsheets torn, a small lamp overturned. This was not a quick, merciful end. This was prolonged torment. Across the hall, in Michael's room, the scene was even more disturbing. Michael, the athletic 15-year-old, lay sprawled on the floor, surrounded by his sports trophies, his body bearing multiple defensive wounds. He had fought desperately for his life, but his assailant had been relentless, overwhelming him with a ferocity that spoke of an almost supernatural strength or a profound, personal vendetta. He, too, had been stabbed repeatedly, the wounds deep and precise, as if the killer had aimed for vital organs with chilling efficiency. Miles felt a cold dread settle in his bones. This was no random act. The sheer brutality, the methodical nature of the killings, it spoke of a deep-seated hatred, a desire not just to kill, but to inflict maximum suffering. The binding of Olivia, the prolonged struggle with Michael, the sheer overkill on Samuel and Eleanor, it was a statement. But what statement? And by whom? "Any signs of a break-in?" Miles asked, turning to Detective Miller, a younger officer with a keen eye, who was meticulously dusting a banister for prints. Miller shook his head. "None that we can find, Miles. No forced entry. Windows are all locked from the inside. It's like they let someone in, or the killer already had access. Or someone was already inside," Evelyn added, her voice soft but firm. "The timing of the deaths is difficult to pinpoint precisely without more examination, but the initial assessment suggests they all occurred in the early hours of this morning, likely between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. There's no indication of anything being taken, no ransacked rooms, no missing valuables. This wasn't a robbery." Miles's mind raced. If it wasn't a robbery, and there was no forced entry, the implications were chilling. Either the Blackwoods knew their killer, or the killer had found a way to bypass their sophisticated security system, a system that was supposed to be impenetrable. "Let's get everyone involved," Miles instructed. "Neighbors, friends, employees, anyone who had access to this house. Check security footage from the surrounding properties. Look for anyone out of place. This family had enemies somewhere. But who would harbor such hatred for the Blackwoods? They were pillars of the community, respected and admired. Samuel Blackwood was a shrewd businessman, yes, but he was known for his ethical dealings. Eleanor was beloved for her charity work. Their children popular and well-adjusted. The public perception of the Blackwoods was one of unwavering success and benevolence. As the day wore on, the crime scene investigation became a meticulous, painstaking process. Every inch of the house was examined, every potential piece of evidence bagged and tagged. The scale of the tragedy was overwhelming, a dark stain on the pristine image of Edenwood. Late that afternoon, as the sun began its descent, casting long, mournful shadows across the Blackwood estate. Miles found himself back in the living room, staring at the empty space where Samuel Blackwood's body had lain. The stench of cleaning chemicals now mingled with the lingering, faint smell of blood. Detective Miller approached him, a tablet in his hand. "We've got something, Miles. Not much, but something. We found a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a raven, tucked beneath Olivia's bed. It's not hers, according to her best friend, who was just interviewed. Doesn't look like any of the family's possessions." Miles took the tablet, zooming in on the image of the raven. It was dark, almost obsidian, with eyes that seemed to gleam with a faint, unsettling intelligence. It was a strange, almost symbolic offering, left in the wake of such carnage. A calling card? A message? "And this," Miller continued, "is where it gets really weird. We found a single, solitary fingerprint on the underside of the raven. It doesn't match anyone in the family or any of the known associates. We're running it through the national database, but it's a long shot. A single fingerprint. A small, dark bird. In a house where lives had been brutally extinguished. These were the only tangible clues, whispering promises of a deeper, more sinister narrative." Miles felt a cold certainty settle over him. This was not a simple case. The obsidian canvas, as he silently dubbed the scene of the crime, was far more complex, far more chilling than any he had encountered before. This was the opening act of a nightmare, a brutal overture that would reverberate through Edenwood and beyond for years to come. The idyllic facade of the town had been irrevocably shattered, revealing a darkness that lay hidden beneath, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. And Miles Corbin, a man weary of the world's horrors, knew deep in his gut that this was just the beginning of a relentless, soul-crushing hunt for a killer who had painted their masterpiece in blood. The echoes of Edenwood's shattered peace would soon become a symphony of terror. The Blackwood massacre had ripped a gaping hole in the placid veneer of Edenwood. The town, once synonymous with quiet charm, was now a macabre spectacle, swarming with journalists, grief tourists, and the grim-faced agents of law enforcement. For Detective Miles Corbin, the immediate aftermath was a blur of fluorescent lights, stale coffee, and the cloying scent of fear that clung to every phone call, every hushed conversation. The initial shock had given way to a gnawing frustration, a silent scream building in his chest as the leads dwindled to dust and the pressure mounted with each passing, fruitless day. Another dead end. "Miles?" Detective Miller sighed, dropping a file onto Miles's already overflowing desk. It contained the meticulously compiled alibis of every handyman, gardener, and delivery person who had access to the Blackwood estate. All checked out. The security system logs, analyzed by state-of-the-art specialists, showed no breaches. It was as if the killer had simply materialized from the ether. Miles rubbed his temples, the faint scent of ash from a forgotten cigarette still clinging to his fingers. "What about the raven, Miller? Anything on that fingerprint?" National database came up empty for a direct match. "It's a partial print, clean but not enough to flag a known criminal. Our best guess is it belongs to someone with no prior record, or someone whose prints aren't in the system." Miller sounded defeated, a sentiment Miles knew all too well. The carved wooden raven, dark as a moonless night, had become the single, unsettling focal point of the investigation. It wasn't just a clue. It felt like a deliberate taunt, a macabre signature left by a killer who seemed to revel in their anonymity. Dr. Evelyn Reed, with her chillingly precise insights, had examined the raven thoroughly. "It's a particular type of wood, Miles," she'd informed him, her voice low and thoughtful. "Indigenous to the mountainous regions of Oregon, not common around Edenwood. And the carving, it's intricate, almost ritualistic. Not a child's toy. More like a talisman." Talisman. The word hung in the air, hinting at something beyond simple vengeance. The FBI, brought in due to the sheer brutality and high-profile nature of the case, had sent Special Agent Lena Hansen. Hansen was a woman of steely resolve and an intimidating intellect, her gaze sharp, missing nothing. She quickly took charge of the profiling aspect, her voice cool and analytical. The killer exhibits extreme overkill, especially on the parents, Samuel and Eleanor. This suggests intense personal rage, a deep-seated grievance. The binding and suffocation of Olivia points to a desire for control, perhaps even a prolonged psychological torment, while Michael's defensive wounds indicate a fierce, desperate struggle. This isn't a thrill-kill detective. This is a message. A very, very loud one. Hanson's profile painted a chilling picture. An intelligent, meticulous individual, highly organized, likely with a deep-seated grudge against Samuel Blackwood specifically, or what he represented. The lack of forced entry, the precise targeting of victims, the ritualistic raven, it all pointed to someone who had planned this for a very long time. Someone who had an intimate knowledge of the Blackwoods' habits and the layout of their home. This person may have had a professional facade, Hanson concluded. Someone who could move through society undetected, yet harbored a terrifying darkness beneath. The media, of course, had their own theories, fueled by the vacuum of concrete information. Sensational headlines screamed about satanic cults, disgruntled business rivals, or a deranged vagrant. Each new rumor sent Miles's phone ringing off the hook, demanding answers he didn't have. He found himself increasingly isolated, the weight of four brutally extinguished lives pressing down on him. Sleep was a fleeting luxury, plagued by images of the Blackwood family, their faces frozen in horror. Then a breakthrough. A low-level hit on the partial fingerprint finally came in from the national database. Not a direct match to a known criminal, but a match to a very specific, limited database. A registry of individuals involved in minor offenses in rural Oregon, often linked to small, off-grid communities. The name? Elias Thorne. His record was sparse. A few counts of minor vandalism, a charge for illegal foraging on private land, and a brief, dismissed charge of disturbing the peace at a local town hall meeting. He was known for being reclusive, fiercely independent, and holding deep anti-establishment views. He was also known to frequent a particular area in the remote wilderness of the Cascade Foothills, an area vaguely associated with a reclusive group. Miles felt a surge of adrenaline, the first real hope in weeks. Elias Thorne, he repeated, the name tasting like cold steel on his tongue. Let's find out everything we can about this man. The investigation pivoted. Miles and Miller, accompanied by a small team, headed deep into the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Cascade Foothills. The drive itself was a journey into a forgotten world. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to treacherous dirt tracks barely wider than their SUV. The air grew colder, the trees denser, and the sense of isolation more profound. After hours of navigating the winding paths, they found it. A crude, hand-painted sign nailed to a gnarled tree, reading "The Children of the Obsidian Star." Beneath it, etched into the wood, was a stylized symbol, a jagged star with a single unblinking eye at its center. "Obsidian Star," Miles muttered, a chill running down his spine. The Black Bird, the name of the group, it was too much of a coincidence. The settlement was less a village and more a collection of rough-hewn cabins, tents, and makeshift shelters nestled deep in a secluded valley, hidden from the outside world. There was no electricity, no running water, only the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. As they approached, a few wary, gaunt figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes holding a mixture of suspicion and defiance. They were thin, dressed in rough, homespun clothes, and their faces bore the unmistakable signs of a life lived on the fringes. Miles immediately knew this wasn't just a commune. It was a cult. The fervent, almost fanatical gleam in their eyes spoke volumes. "We're looking for Elias Thorne," Miles announced, his voice firm, echoing in the quiet valley. A gaunt old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, stepped forward. "Elias ain't here. He left weeks ago. Went off to do the Sentinel's bidding." Her voice was raspy, laced with a strange reverence. "The Sentinel?" Miller pressed. The old woman's eyes glittered. "The guide, the truth-bringer, the one who sees the rot and cleanses it." Her words, though cryptic, sent a shiver down Miles's spine. Cleanse the rot. It sounded disturbingly familiar to what Lena Hansen had suggested about the Blackwood murders. A thorough search of the encampment yielded little. Most residents claimed ignorance of Elias's whereabouts, or offered vague, evasive answers. Miles sensed a deep-seated loyalty, a fear that transcended the law. However, in Elias's abandoned cabin, amidst a collection of survival gear and esoteric texts, they found it. A crudely bound journal. The journal was a descent into a mind slowly being warped. Elias's handwriting, initially legible, became increasingly erratic, filled with religious zealotry and violent fantasies. It spoke of the cleansing, the purging of the corrupt, and the need to restore balance to a world poisoned by greed and power. Pages were filled with diatribes against the architects of ruin, the lords of industry, and specifically the Blackwood Blight. Miles's heart pounded as he read an entry. The Sentinel has spoken. The first tree, the mighty oak of Blackwood, must fall. Its roots are deep in the poisoned earth. Its branches cast a shadow of decay. The path to the obsidian star begins with its crumbling. The journal was a horrifying confirmation of their suspicions. This wasn't just a random act. It was part of a grand, terrifying design. Elias was a true believer, a soldier in a war he believed was righteous. Back in Edenwood, with the journal as their guide, Miles and Sarah Miller, a tenacious investigative journalist who had been hounding him for interviews, formed an unlikely alliance. Sarah, a seasoned reporter who had built a career uncovering the dark underbelly of fringe groups, had been tracking the children of the Obsidian Star for years, though her articles had always been met with skepticism. She was sharp, resourceful, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of cults and their methodologies. This Sentinel figure, Sarah explained, poring over Elias's journal in Miles's office, is the linchpin. In groups like this, the leader is everything. They don't just command, they indoctrinate. They become the voice of God, the arbiter of truth. The level of brainwashing required to get someone like Elias to commit such an act is profound. Miles pushed a map across the table, circling the location of the Blackwood estate and the cult's compound. Samuel Blackwood's company had extensive land dealings in this region over 20 years ago, controversial ones. Many small landowners were forced out. It caused a lot of resentment. Sarah's eyes widened. That's it. That's the core grievance. These cults often form around a shared trauma or injustice. The Blackwoods, particularly Samuel, would be the ultimate symbol of that injustice for these people. They see him as the architect of their displacement, the source of their suffering. They delved into Samuel Blackwood's past land acquisitions. The records were murky, full of legal loopholes and aggressive tactics that, while technically legal, were morally dubious. Blackwood had purchased vast tracts of land at rock-bottom prices, displacing families who had lived there for generations, all to make way for a sprawling resort and logging operation that had ultimately failed. The resentment had festered for decades, boiling beneath the surface of the forgotten community. Meanwhile, Dr. Reed's toxicology report came back with another chilling detail. She had found traces of a rare, fast-acting sedative derived from a specific mountain herb in the systems of Samuel and Eleanor Blackwood. It wouldn't kill them on its own, Evelyn explained, but it would have rendered them incapacitated, probably asleep, before the attack. No struggle, no scream. Olivia was suffocated, yes, but there were also traces of this sedative in her system, though less potent, perhaps from cross-contamination or a smaller dose. Michael, however, had none, which aligns with his defensive wounds. He was fully conscious, fighting for his life. The sedative confirmed the killer's meticulous planning and an intimate knowledge of the Blackwoods' routine. It also suggested a deep familiarity with the local flora of the mountainous regions where the cult resided. So, they were poisoned first, Miles murmured, the pieces slowly, terrifyingly, falling into place. And Elias Thorne fits the bill. He's from that region, he's part of this cult, and he has a deep-seated hatred for the Blackwoods. But something still nagged at Miles. Elias seemed like a foot soldier, not the mastermind. The meticulousness, the psychological torment of Olivia, the sheer audacity of the entire operation, it felt beyond a simple zealot. It felt like a truly brilliant, truly twisted mind was pulling the strings. "The Sentinel," Sarah said, as if reading his thoughts. "Elias was a puppet. The Sentinel is the one we need to find. This leader likely never gets their hands dirty, but they are the true architect of the violence. They are masters of manipulation." Days turned into weeks. The search for Elias Thorne became a relentless manhunt. Leads came in from all over Oregon, tips from hikers, hunters, and isolated residents who had seen a figure matching Elias's description. The terrain was brutal, the wilderness vast, but Miles was driven by a desperate need for answers. Finally, a break. A remote cabin, miles from any road, was reported to the authorities by a lone trapper who had heard strange noises. Miles and a small team moved in under the cover of darkness. The cabin was Elias's hideout. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Elias Thorne, gaunt and wild-eyed, lunged at Miles with a crude knife, fueled by a final, desperate surge of fanaticism. Miles, seasoned and quick, disarmed him, but not before Elias inflicted a shallow cut on his arm. As Elias was subdued, struggling against the cuffs, his eyes, burning with a chilling fervor, locked onto Miles. "The obsidian star will rise," Elias choked out, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "The corrupt will fall. This is just the beginning." He twisted violently, reaching into a hidden pocket. Miles reacted instinctively, but it was too late. Elias pulled out a small, dark vial and swallowed its contents. Foam frothed at his lips, his body convulsed, and within seconds, he lay still, eyes wide and unseeing. Miles knelt, checking for a pulse. None. Elias Thorne was dead. Suicide by poison. Miles felt a bitter surge of frustration. The one direct link to the Blackwood massacre gone. But just as he was about to give up, Elias's lips moved again, a faint whisper escaping them. "Isolde," he rasped, his voice barely audible, his eyes still fixed on some unseen point. "Isolde, the Sentinel, the architect." And then silence. Isolde. The name echoed in the cabin, a new, terrifying piece of the puzzle. Elias was dead, but he had left them a name. Not a title, but a name. Miles looked at the small, empty vial that had fallen from Elias's hand. The same kind of crude, yet effective, concoction he had seen in Dr. Reed's notes on the sedative found in the Blackwoods. This wasn't just a zealot. It was someone with serious knowledge. "Isolde," Miles repeated, a cold dread washing over him. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of understanding the true scope of the horror. Elias Thorne was merely a tool, a willing pawn. The real monster, the true architect of the obsidian canvas, was still out there. And her name was Isolde. The first chapter had closed on a bloody tableau. This one ended with a name, a whisper from the dying, pointing towards a far more dangerous and elusive adversary. The Obsidian Trail had led them to a hidden cult, a fanatical pawn, and finally, to the chilling realization that a master manipulator, the Sentinel known as Isolde, had just begun her terrifying campaign of cleansing. The echoes in Edenwood were about to turn into a full-blown symphony of terror. The name Isolde hung in the air like a poisoned mist, heavy with unknown dread. Elias Thorne's death, rather than providing closure, had only deepened the mystery, unveiling a new layer of chilling complexity. Miles Corbin felt a renewed sense of urgency, an intuitive certainty that Isolde was not just another cult leader. She was the true mastermind, a ghost in the machine who pulled the strings from the shadows. Special Agent Lena Hansen, usually composed, showed a flicker of concern when Miles relayed Elias's dying word. Isolde. That's a powerful, almost mythical name. It suggests someone who sees themselves as more than human, perhaps a deity in their own right, within the cult structure. And the fact that Elias had a suicide pill, likely the same substance used to incapacitate the Blackwoods. This person is incredibly organized and thorough. Sarah Miller, the journalist, proved invaluable in this new phase of the investigation. Her extensive research into fringe groups and her deep understanding of their psychological dynamics offered insights that standard police procedures couldn't. Cult leaders don't just command. They create an alternate reality, Sarah explained, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard as she cross-referenced databases and obscure forums. They prey on the vulnerable, those disenfranchised by society, and offer them a sense of purpose, a distorted form of justice. If Isolde is the Sentinel, she's likely brilliant, charismatic, and profoundly manipulative. They discovered that Isolde wasn't just a random name. It led them to Isolde Vance, a phantom of the past. Born into one of the families brutally displaced by Samuel Blackwood's land deals over 2 decades ago, Isolde Vance had been a child then, witnessing the destruction of her community firsthand. Public records showed she was remarkably gifted academically, securing scholarships to prestigious universities, only to vanish from the grid shortly after graduation. No social media, no tax records, no employment history. She had become a ghost, meticulously erasing her footprint from the modern world. She didn't just disappear, Miles mused, staring at a grainy black and white photo of a young Isolde, her eyes already holding an intensity beyond her years. She went underground to rebuild herself, to become the Sentinel. Sarah uncovered a hidden online manifesto, subtly disseminated across various dark web forums and encrypted message boards frequented by anti-establishment groups. The language was chillingly eloquent, a blend of philosophical discourse, environmental activism, and radical calls for societal cleansing. It spoke of the rotting elite, the corrupt architects of modern ruin, and the need for a purification through fire to restore balance to the natural world. The Blackwood massacre was implicitly referenced as the first seed, a warning of things to come. This is not just about revenge for her family, Sarah warned, her voice hushed. This is about a vision, a grand, twisted ideology. The Blackwood family was just the symbol. Isolde wants to dismantle the entire system, starting with those who benefited from the injustices of the past. Their fears were soon confirmed. 2 weeks after Elias's death, another high-profile couple, the Thompsons, prominent real estate developers in northern Oregon with past business dealings with Samuel Blackwood, were found dead in their lavish suburban home. The scene was eerily similar. No forced entry, the same rare sedative in their systems, and a single, intricately carved obsidian raven left at the scene. This time, the killer had left no direct fingerprint, having worn gloves. But the pattern was undeniable. Isolde Vance had begun her Chapter 2. She's escalating, Hansen stated grimly during a multi-agency briefing. She's testing the waters, refining her methods. And she's sending a clear message. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a campaign. The multi-agency task force, now a sprawling operation, struggled to keep up with Isolde's calculated moves. She operated with phantom-like efficiency, her cult members acting as proxies, moving through the shadows, leaving behind minimal traces. The challenge wasn't just tracking Isolde. It was understanding her, anticipating her next strike. Miles found himself immersed in Isolde Vance's history. He read her academic papers, philosophical essays written in her youth, which revealed a keen intellect and a deep passion for justice, twisted by her personal trauma. She was fascinated by ancient cultures, herbalism, and the concept of sacred vengeance. He realized that Isolde wasn't insane. She was dangerously rational, driven by a logic born of profound resentment. The discovery of a hidden network of prepaid, burner phones, used by the cult members, finally provided a breakthrough. Miles's team, with the help of federal cyber experts, managed to trace a pattern of communications originating from a highly remote, geologically unstable region deep within the Cascade Mountains, an area known for its ancient lava tubes and caves. It was a perfect hiding spot for a group seeking to remain invisible. Sarah recalled an old local legend about the Serpent's Maw, a vast network of lava tubes said to be a spiritual site for ancient indigenous tribes, and later, a hiding place for outlaws. It's a natural fortress, she explained, pulling up satellite images. Virtually impenetrable without a guide who knows the passages. Miles knew this was it. This was where Isolde Vance, the Sentinel, had built her sanctuary, her temple of purification. The final assault was meticulously planned. Miles, alongside a SWAT team and several FBI agents, prepared to infiltrate the serpent's maw. The air was thick with tension. They were going into the lion's den, facing not just armed cultists, but individuals who had been brainwashed into believing they were fighting a holy war, willing to die for their leader. As they descended into the cavernous depths of the lava tubes, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, a faint, metallic tang that Miles recognized as the signature of Isolde's herbal concoctions. Crude torches flickered in the distance, illuminating tribalistic symbols painted on the cave walls, depicting the obsidian star, scenes of fire and purification, and distorted figures representing the corrupt. They encountered resistance almost immediately. Cult members, eyes wide with fanatical zeal, emerged from hidden alcoves, armed with makeshift weapons and a chilling willingness to sacrifice themselves. The narrow passages turned into claustrophobic battlegrounds, the sounds of gunfire and shouts echoing off the ancient rock. Miles fought with a grim determination, the images of the Blackwood family, especially the terrified eyes of Olivia, fueling his resolve. Deeper within the labyrinthine tunnels, they found the core of the sanctuary. A large, natural chamber, lit by hundreds of candles, formed a crude but powerful temple. At its center, standing before a large, carved obsidian altar, was Isolde Vance. She was not as Miles had imagined, not a wild-eyed fanatic, but a woman of striking presence, dressed simply, her long, dark hair braided with feathers, her eyes burning with an almost serene intensity. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, resonant, and utterly captivating, even in the chaos of the raid. "Detective Corbin," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber, as if she had been expecting him. "You've come. I knew you would. You represent the very system I seek to dismantle. The architects of this dying world." Miles raised his weapon, his finger hovering near the trigger. "It's over, Isolde. Your reign of terror ends now." Isolde smiled, a chillingly tranquil expression. "Terror? Or justice? You see only the blood, detective. I see the seeds of a new world, purged of the rot planted by men like Samuel Blackwood. He took everything from my people. He built his empire on their tears, their despair. And your system, your justice, did nothing. So I became the justice." She then launched into a chilling monologue, articulating her twisted philosophy with a captivating eloquence. She spoke of the earth's suffering, the corruption of power, and the inherent injustice of a system that allowed the wealthy to thrive while the poor withered. She justified her actions, the horrific murders, as necessary sacrifices, a surgical strike against a cancerous growth. Her words were a dangerous blend of truth and madness, designed to sow doubt and manipulate. Even in that moment, Miles felt a faint, unsettling pull, recognizing the power of her conviction. As SWAT members moved to apprehend her, Isolde made her final move. She didn't fight back physically. Instead, she reached for a small, dark vial on the altar. "You can arrest my body, detective," she said, her eyes fixed on Miles. "But you cannot kill the idea. The obsidian star has been lit. Its light will spread. Others will rise. This is not the end. It is merely the beginning of the end of the old world." Before anyone could stop her, she brought the vial to her lips. Miles lunged, but it was too late. Isolde Vance, the Sentinel, swallowed the contents, her eyes still blazing with defiant purpose. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips, and then, like Elias, her body convulsed, and she collapsed to the ground, dead. The serpent's maw was secured. The remaining cult members, stripped of their leader, were subdued, many of them weeping, their faith shattered. The obsidian canvas, the horrifying masterpiece painted in blood, finally had its artist confirmed, even if she had escaped earthly justice through her own hand. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Isolde Vance and the children of the Obsidian Star dominated national headlines. The shocking revelation of a brilliant, vengeful cult leader, driven by decades of injustice, captivated and horrified the public. The Blackwood case was officially closed, yet its echoes reverberated far beyond Edenwood. Miles Corbin returned to his quiet office, the scent of stale coffee now mixed with the phantom smell of damp earth and the chilling emptiness of the lava tubes. He looked out at the familiar streets of Edenwood, now forever changed. The idyllic facade had been brutally ripped away, revealing the dark, festering resentments that could, in the right circumstances, erupt into unimaginable horror. He held the small, intricately carved obsidian raven from the Blackwood scene in his hand, a chilling memento of the case. Isolde Vance was gone, but her words, her final prophecy, haunted him. This is not the end. It is merely the beginning of the end of the old world. The obsidian canvas had been completed, a brutal masterpiece of vengeance and ideological fervor. But Miles knew, deep in his weary soul, that the darkness Isolde had unleashed, the questions she had posed about justice, corruption, and the price of progress, would continue to echo, whispering their chilling legacy in the quiet corners of America for years to come. The true cost of the American dream sometimes manifested in the most terrifying ways imaginable. And the Sentinel, though dead, had ensured that her message would live on, a silent threat etched onto the very landscape of a nation.